Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for hopping on. We're going to give folks another minute or so to trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Um, Welcome, everyone. My name's Erin Shipley. I work in outreach and engagement for the Chicago Recovery Plan grants. I want to thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. We're going to have we're going to go over all of the grant opportunities for the Chicago Recovery Plan up to $250,000. If you do have other questions about the grant programs or other funding options from DPD, you can email us at dpd@cityofchicago.org. Um, let's get started. Welcome. We have three grant opportunities to cover today. We're going to talk about the community development grants with your program lead Laura Lindroth, equitable transit-oriented development with your program lead Eric Vigera, and the climate infrastructure fund grants with the program lead Luke Mish. The Chicago Recovery Plan, if you don't know, was launched in 2021, but as of May 2023, we've allocated almost $61 million in grant funding to small businesses and nonprofits across the city. The map on your screen shows the different rounds of funding and the different programs that we have invested in over the course of the plan since we made our first grant announcement last year. All right, so these are our grant programs and these are some of the projects that we'll be working on. We're going to go over broadly what opportunities and what eligibility is for all of the grant programs first. All right, so we'll start with you're applying for grant funding up to $250,000. Eligibility for these grant programs can include commercial, mixed use, light manufacturing, and residential. There are specific guidelines for those. Eligibility can include vanilla box projects, which are projects undergoing development or construction without a known tenant. So if you're a property owner or a developer, these are open to businesses, developers, nonprofits, property owners. There are exceptions to eligibility and specific eligibility needs within each program that the program managers will get into. And then selected projects must be completed within 2 years. This is really important to us. We are going to be selecting projects that can break ground in 2023 and 2024 so that they can be completed within the timeline that the funding needs to be allocated within. This is a reimbursement. It's important that you also know that this is a reimbursement-based grant. This grant will be allocated, but funds are distributed after you reach your project milestones, and you will be reimbursed with the grant funds. Projects are strongly encouraged to have established site control documentation or proof of obtaining site control, i.e. you need a deed, a lease, or an ROI. We're going to talk about the timeline for the grant program. So the application closes at 11:59 p.m. Central Time on August 18th. Your application must be completed by then. We will be announcing finalists before the end of this year. After we name our finalists, there is a 6-month administrative phase for document submission and to finalize your project scope. After that 6-month period, is when you will get your conditional award letter, and I'll let the program managers talk a little bit more about that, but you'll get your conditional award letter, which means you're starting your project. Over the next 6 to 18 months, that is when your project is underway, it's under construction, you're hitting the milestones to get your reimbursements, and then within 24 months of being named a finalist, we will help you close out your project. Your construction will be completed and your business, your nonprofit, your organization will be ready to operate. Grant structure. So grant funds are awarded based on total project cost and determination of eligible expenses. Like I said before, all programs are reimbursement based. This means that you'll have to hit those project milestones to receive your grant funding. Regardless of total project cost, the maximum award for small grants, these grant programs, is $250,000. So we will award you up to $250,000, but we will cover 75% of your eligible project costs, which means there's a minimum of 25% that is the grantee portion of what you have to pay for your eligible project costs. The one thing I do want to note here, and I'll let Luke, when he talks about the Climate Infrastructure Fund, get into this a little bit more, but Climate Infrastructure Fund projects can be eligible for grants up to 100% of eligible project costs, but they are still capped at $250,000. All right, project selection. Priority will be given to projects that fit within the core values of our program. So we're looking for catalytic projects with strong local impact. We're talking job creation, amenities, benefits to the community, alignment with community plans, projects that are located in historically disinvested areas that build upon other city programs, thinking about Invest Southwest corridors and other community initiatives. And then, as I said, we're looking for projects that are ready to break ground in 2024 so that we can finish on that 2-year timeline. And we want established site control is strongly preferred. And we will also consider folks who are working to obtain control of their site. All right, I'm going to hand this off to my colleague, Laura Lindroth, who is the lead program manager for community development grants.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Erin. My name is Laura Lindroth, and I am the lead project manager for the small community development grants. To date, we have accepted 111 applications, and we're very excited to see all of the ones that will be submitted this next month. I come from a family of 4th-generation architects and general contractors who have been in the Chicagoland area since 1941. And I am an entrepreneur myself as well. So I understand the challenges, frustrations, the heartache, blood, sweat, and tears that go into these kinds of projects. I also know the thrill and the pride that comes with seeing a dream actually come to fruition. And it gives me great pleasure to support our grant finalists in achieving their visions. We're truly grateful for the essential contributions that many of you are making to our communities in Chicago and the visions that you have to improve our city. Your determination, ingenuity, and creativity are what make our neighborhoods so special and unique, and what will help our city to continue to thrive. Perhaps your vision includes funding the development of a new grocery store in an area that's currently a food desert, for instance, or expanding the size of a successful nonprofit's building to be able to serve even more children and their families. As part of the overall COVID recovery plan, the purpose of the Community Development Grant Program is to consider projects that will continue to enhance and improve Chicago neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So looking at the eligibility of this particular community development grant, it is open to commercial, mixed use, or light manufacturing projects. In terms of the mixed use, it can be a commercial and residential split in your project site. The commercial does need to be slightly overweighing the residential, so like a 51-49% split is fine. But we can cover some residential and that mixed use. Nonprofits are also eligible for this grant. So I just want to point that out, not just small business owners, property owners, and community developers, but also nonprofits. We really are looking for this to enhance the community. So what's important in this grant is to show, why are you different? What is going to be unique about your business or your nonprofit that will serve your particular community? What is your story? You know, when you're doing the application, paint a picture for us. Act as though we know nothing about your industry or anything about your project or your community or anything else. So tell us what it is that is particularly great. In terms of applicants from all areas of Chicago, you as an applicant yourself can live outside of the city of Chicago, but the project that we're funding and that you'll be submitting for the application, the business or the nonprofit, does need to be within the city limits. We are looking again for places that are going to somehow be showing also that they're being increasing equity in some way. So anything that you can voice about that. And then the last thing I wanted to just point out on this little list here is the vanilla box projects, which I know Erin mentioned as well. But just to clarify that as well, that's just, you know, if you're a landlord of a retail space, for instance, and you're just not attracting the kind of tenants that you would really like for your space, or it's been sitting empty for a long time, and you feel like if you were to do some renovation or maybe even rezone it for a different type of business or something like that, that could really, you know, enhance that space. So those are the kind of projects that we can do as well with that. Next slide, please. So in terms of eligible expenses with this grant, again, this is a reimbursable grant, as Erin mentioned. So you will have to upfront all of the charges and pay for everything, your total project expenses, but we will reimburse up to 75% or $250,000, whichever is less. So an analogy to kind of give you an idea of what is eligible with this is, if you were to turn your business or nonprofit upside down, the things that would stay inside, if you were to shake that little business and turn it upside down and shake it, the things that would stay inside are usually the things that are eligible. So wired, installed, plumbed, you know, anything that's kind of held down in terms of the construction pieces and whatever, and the equipment will be eligible expenses. This is a bond-funded grant, and so all of the expenses that are eligible have to be capital expenses. So generally, for instance, with a kitchen, the things like a plug-in standalone refrigerator would not be an eligible expense, but an electric fryer or a walk-in refrigerator that has to be installed and, you know, all of that would be. We do some land acquisition expenses. Those are, you know, not always eligible, but generally architecture and design, engineering, site prep, demolition, generally all construction types of things. In terms of, like, if you want to become more ADA compliant, if you want to add in a security system, most of the security system will be eligible. What might not be is the components like a computer monitor that you might use in order to look at the security system, like be able to watch the video or whatever like that. That piece of it would not be. So when you are submitting your application, and especially later on, if you are an applicant for this grant to be as itemized and detailed as possible is really helpful, because then we can kind of take a look at that eligible expenses and say, okay, this isn't. And if there's specific questions about this, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer that as I can. And then let's see if there's one other thing I wanted to mention here. Oh, with the land acquisition. So I do want to say, though, that one of the things that we look for in these applications is how prepared are you for this already? What have you already gotten done? So if you already have site control, if you already have a lease or a deed, or you've talked to a landlord and you have a letter of intent or something like that, that's going to go a little bit further than somebody that says, well, I have a great idea for a business, but I don't really even know where I would have this. Because this is a location-based grant and we're really looking for the specific community and how this is going to enhance a community, a specific community, at least knowing that piece of it would be helpful. And the more that you have that site control or some idea of where you would put your business, that's going to be important. So next slide, please. So just the last thing to go over is the application tips for this particular grant. The first one is readiness. Again, those who are most ready for this are going to be at the top of the pile, just because this project does have to be completed within 2 years. So if you are brand new, completely starting a whole startup business and whatever, we would want to be able to clearly see that you could complete that construction and everything necessary in that full 2 years. And those who have already maybe started the process a little bit are going to have a bit of an advantage on that. But again, submit everything and tell us, what it is that you're doing, and then, we can go from there. It's helpful to have for sure to have your architect in mind, at least if you've talked to a general contractor, anything like that is helpful. With architects, it's not necessary to have self-certified, but it is something that'll speed along your process. Generally, they can get permits and things a little easier. With feasibility, just really showing that you have the means to fund this project. Again, it is a reimbursable. So maybe you don't have all the funds, but show us what you do have so far, and that you have a stake in this game and stuff like that. With the community impact piece, again, anything that you can do to tell your story of why this is so important, and anything you can do to document that, say like letters of support, or maybe you've talked to your alderman, maybe you've talked to your neighbors, people in the community that are influencers, and they have, are backing you and saying, hey, yeah, this is really important and here's why. So those letters of support, and a detailed plan of what you're going to do and how you've looked into, you've investigated this and know that it's going to work and be successful. And then the last thing is we do diligence. That's a lot of do's. We do check your due diligence in terms of, do you have any city-owned debt? Do you have property taxes? Have you not paid your water bill on your business, or something like that? So just making sure that you don't have any extraordinary debt that's outstanding, or you've at least made some headway with trying to set up a payment plan or address that debt would be helpful. So that I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to the climate and infrastructure, but I will stay on the line, and I'm happy to answer questions later on or address them in the Q&A section. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Luke Mish, planner here in the Department of Planning and Development, and co-lead of the Climate Infrastructure Fund. As you can see on the screen, the purpose of the Climate Infrastructure Fund program is to accelerate the city's transition to the green economy, specifically reducing emissions by 62% by the year 2040. And so the grants that we are making available aim to promote solar and other renewable energy sources, decarbonize buildings, which means making our building stock no longer dependent on carbon-based fuel sources, such as natural gas, increasing electric vehicle ownership and the presence of charging infrastructure in Chicago, and improving resilience infrastructure. On the next slide, We'll talk a little bit here about who can apply and what do funds cover. So we, similar to the other grant programs that you'll hear about today, our grants are open to nonprofit organizations and small businesses. We often get asked whether or not the nonprofit category includes religious institutions. It does. We can provide more context on that as needed. Essentially, as long as we're not funding religious elements, which are climate eligible costs don't fall into that category, we're safe on that front. Priority is given to applicants located in under-resourced communities and what we call environmental justice communities. Another common question we get at this stage is, well, how is that defined? What are the areas in Chicago that are considered environmental justice communities? We use two definitions. One is created by the federal government through the EPA, and another was created by the state of Illinois. We basically overlap those, and if anybody falls into either of those categories, we consider that an environmental justice community. I just want to note here that we're not only eligible to applicants in those locations, we simply prioritize projects that come from there. So more information about those is on our website, which I'll share here at the end. What are we not open to? Residential uses. So again, nonprofits and small businesses is where we're focusing. So residential uses, even something like an apartment building, if that's being run as a small business, we are not focusing on residential. We're focusing on those commercial and nonprofit uses only. We do not include industrial. And then specifically, we're really focused on climate investments with the building. So if you're looking at a kind of a full overhaul renovation of a building for a new use or an expanded use, you've got a big addition on a building that's coming in, we're probably not the right fund for you. I would say maybe the community development grants that Laura just discussed would probably be better suited to your project, because just simply because we only focus on the climate elements. So what does that mean? Well, we can cover, actually, sorry, can we go back to the last slide really quick? Yeah, thanks. So in terms of the expenses, so that's who can apply. In terms of what do we cover, we can cover pre-development, so the planning, design related to climate investments, things like energy assessment of the building to determine what kind of investments are needed. We can cover that. We can, of course, cover the actual construction or renovation costs, similar to Laura's description of turning a building over and shaking it, and whatever sticks is what we can pay for. We're in the same boat there. So only fixed capital improvements to the building. And then we have specific eligible expenses by project type. So on the next slide, we'll start digging into what those different types are. We have 3 project tracks: renewable energy and energy efficiency, electric vehicles and EV charging, and green infrastructure. And we ask folks to select one of these tracks when they apply. We ask different questions for each of these. And so we really can't combine funding across these tracks at this time. On the next slide, I can dive a little bit more into what that first track is. So for renewable energy and energy efficiency, here we're looking to fund energy improvement, energy efficiency upgrades to buildings, things like space heating and cooling, specifically with electric heat pumps, which is a new technology, air sealing and insulation, so improving the building envelope to allow a more efficient heating and cooling of the building, efficient lighting, and then even elements like water heaters or induction cooktops, again, electrical powered elements. And then for renewable energy within this category, that includes things like rooftop solar panels, wind turbines. We've had some folks express interest in geothermal energy. That would all be included in this as well. For electric vehicles and EV charging infrastructure, pretty straightforward here. If your organization or your business is looking to purchase an electric vehicle, that is something we can help support. And or if you're looking to install the charging infrastructure to be able to charge that vehicle at your location, that is something we support. And I'll speak a little bit more about this in a moment as well. And then green infrastructure really captures landscape-based climate improvements. So things like native planting and soil systems, permeable pavement, which is paving that allows rainwater to filter through and be stored on site, other stormwater management investments, things like rain gardens or bioswales, or green roofs. Really, green infrastructure is focused on two fronts primarily. It's allowing stormwater, rainwater to be filtered and stored on site before it goes into our sewer system. As many of you may know, we have a combined sewer system in Chicago, which means, as we've seen this summer, when we have heavy rains, the system is overwhelmed. We get flooding in basements. We have to discharge sewage sometimes into our local waterways because our system cannot take the rainwater and the sewage water at the same time. It can't handle all of that capacity. So this is one strategy to begin to ameliorate those issues. So what are our priorities? Very similar to what Aaron and Laura have both said about CDG and just the program as a whole. We're looking for catalytic projects with a strong local impact that seek to strengthen the community. Again, we do prioritize projects in environmental justice communities, but we are open citywide. And then we're looking for projects that expect to break ground in 2024 and where site control is preferred. We only fund projects on private property. So, we've had folks express interest on, hey, there's a vacant city lot in my neighborhood. I'd love to see that turned into, a park space or some green infrastructure. We are only able to fund projects that are on private property at this time. So tips and tricks to keep in mind. In terms of technology and electrification, we're looking for projects that stack multiple energy efficiency and advanced technology elements together. So essentially, if you are pursuing energy efficiency improvements, we like to prioritize ones that are pushing towards, a carbon-free technology form. So something like a heat pump. We see that a little bit more impactful than simply, say, updating your lighting system within a building. We also, when it comes to electric vehicle projects, we prefer to see projects that are replacing existing vehicles as opposed to existing gas-powered vehicles, as opposed to simply buying new vehicles and adding to a fleet. We like to see projects that have both vehicles and charging stations, not just one or the other. And we especially like to see projects that make those level 3 or fast charging stations and that make those public. So we're really trying to help build that infrastructure across Chicago. With that in mind, anytime for any of our tracks, we're looking for the most comprehensive solutions. So, especially when something in green infrastructure, where you could include multiple elements on your site, or renewable energy projects where you could include multiple elements, the more of those you're able to kind of leverage to stack on top of one another, the more impactful that project can be. We prioritize projects that provide public access to improvements. That's especially true for things like EV charging stations and even access to green infrastructure investments. And then maintenance and operations. This is a key one for us. We do ask applicants to lay out what their maintenance and operations plan would be for our investments. These are often new technologies, new forms of doing things, and we want to make sure that these investments are prepared for the long haul. And so we do want to see that folks know that the way to maintain and repair electric heat pump HVAC system is going to be very different than a gas-powered one. And so we want people to understand that and to be able to demonstrate to us that they're prepared to manage that. Same thing with green infrastructure. Permeable pavement has to be maintained in a different way than standard asphalt or concrete. And we want folks to be able to demonstrate that they understand that and are prepared to do that. And so finally, in terms of evaluation criteria, we look at 3 categories. The climate impact of the project. Will this reduce greenhouse gas emissions or provide other environmental benefits? Equity criteria. Does the project help reduce systemic climate and environmental inequities for communities of color and other disenfranchised communities, and project feasibility and project readiness. You know, is this a project that can break ground in the time needed? If there's elements to the project that we can't fund. Aaron mentioned earlier, we are unique within the projects you're going to hear about today in that we can cover up to 100% of eligible costs. But in any project, not all of the costs will be eligible. So if you're looking to make energy efficiency improvements to your building, there may be some non-energy efficiency related work that you want to take on at the same time. It might not be eligible for our funding. So do you have that funding lined up on your own? We would consider that as part of the project readiness. Do you have the balance of the project funded somehow? Do you have a lender in mind? Do you have operating funds that you're able to divert to this project? So that last category is very critical for us as well. Is this a project that we feel can get off the ground? So I think that's it for me. I'm going to drop in I'll try to drop in the chat our website, and then happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Patrick. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Eric Viera. I'm the program manager for the ETOD, Equitable Transit Oriented Development Program. And just get a quick thumbs up. I'll assume that the scrolling of the slide means you can hear me fine. Let's talk a little bit about ETOD. I think today you're going to hear a lot of similarities across all three programs. And the thing to keep in mind is that each program has its own unique mission. And so when you apply for any of these programs, you have to keep in mind that a lot of those similarities, administrative similarities, are there, but the important thing is to make sure that you apply for the program that you feel mostly aligns, mission mostly aligns with your projects. A couple things, grants for ETOD, as I said, are this is one of those similarities at up to $250,000. It also includes technical assistance. I saw a question in the question and answers, and I think this is a good opportunity to address what one of those questions is, and that's the 75-25% breakdown. What does that mean exactly? Well, what it means is that it doesn't mean that you're only eligible for 75% of the $250,000 grant. You can still very much receive the entire grant up to $250,000. It simply means that every time that you submit an eligible cost with supporting documentation for reimbursement, that 75% of that eligible cost is what will end up being reimbursed. And there's multiple opportunities to submit a reimbursement request. Just keep in mind it's that 75-25 split each time for each submission. And like I said, you can still very much end up with the entire $250,000 grant, depending on the total scope and budget of your project. But that's simply what it means for those who are wondering. The technical assistance is essentially the City of Chicago and the Department of Planning and Development has invested in bringing on subject matter experts in all kinds of development areas, whether it's in architecture or project management, budget and work plan making. And they've invested in this program specifically as a support resource for ETOD grantees. So in addition to receiving a grant, if your project is identified as a finalist, you will also receive that the TA assistance. Some of our partners that are currently providing TA assistance to our current cohort of ETOD finalists for this current funding round include CNT, Center for Neighborhood Technology, Elevated Works, IFF, and many other community agencies with experience in moving and uplifting community projects and development projects like the ones that we expect. The second bullet, ETOD projects are community-led projects that serve disinvested communities near high-frequency transit hubs. This is one of those mission values that I have talked about. ETOD specifically is a program that aims at developing land near either transit hubs, CTA or Metra, within specifically a half mile of transit hubs, or high frequency bus routes, which can be CTA or PACE. That is one thing that is very unique about this particular program. The reason for it is because during the pandemic and subsequently ridership for CTA fell as high as 57% between bus and train commuters. And so this program specifically is aimed at positively impacting pedestrian traffic, and that's why there's a focus in proximity to development of land near transit hubs. Again, ETOD projects will create dense, walkable development. So think how you could positively stimulate pedestrian traffic. Think proximity to CTA, PACE, or Metra hubs. Next slide. I think in this slide, or the next, we're going to talk about the types of developments. There are very different types. So ETOD projects can be residential. They can be mixed use. They can also be commercial. They can be arts and culture focused, retail. Some of the projects that we currently are supporting with this program involve all of the above. We have some projects that are 2 flats or 2 to 6 units. We have other projects that are as many as 200 units. We have projects that have a focus in local arts and theater. Others are focused on childcare services. And some of our finalists are also faith-based. So there's a lot of variety, a lot of flexibility with this particular program. On the left, we see that the program should align with the goals of ETOD. We've talked a little bit about that as far as proximity to transit, whether it's rail or bus routes. And we've talked about the flexibility on the right as far as the types. Another unique flexibility about ETOD is that this upcoming ETOD funding round, which applications are being received currently through August, midnight of August 18, can include ETOD both development and pre-development. Development means construction costs. So it can be electrical, plumbing, general contractor expenses. Those are all eligible expenses under the development focus of ETOD. But for this particular upcoming round, we will also consider some pre-development expense as well. So those are things that take place before construction, such as architecture expenses, administrative fees, accounting, attorney fees, project manager fees, and ETOD will consider those up to 6 months prior to the public announcement. That will happen sometime in late fall or early winter of this year. So that's not August 18th, that is sometime after. But the takeaway there is up to 6 months prior to the public announcement date is how far we will consider both pre-development and development expenses for this ETOD development current E2D development funding round. It's no different than the cohort of projects that are currently underway. All right, next slide. These are just some other examples of projects. We have Little Angels Learning Center. This is the childcare, community childcare project that I mentioned just a few moments ago. All of these are, I think we're going to feature 3 projects here. This is all conceptual art and design from the actual submissions themselves. These are projects that are currently working toward submitting the required documentation. They're all finalists. They're not grantees yet, but they're working to submit the documentation and ultimately reach a contract and either break ground or continue some of the progress that they have already made. Your project doesn't have to be, you don't have to necessarily not have broken ground yet. Like you can, it can be a project that's already underway, depending on how much of that project is already completed. It's also a factor that goes into selection. Something to keep in mind is that when it comes to reimbursement, it really comes down to eligible costs. So it has to be what you are reimbursed for has to be very specific to what you're proposing to do in your submission, in your application. Next slide. We have Food Matters, food-centric real estate development in Bronzeville, and it addresses community identified needs for healthier food options and nutrition. This is also has a housing component. So it's not just a food community resource, but also has some housing attached to the project as well. In a moment, I'll talk a little bit about why that's important if a project does have a housing, either if it's fully residential or mixed use. There's something important to keep in mind specifically with DPOD, but I'll get to that in just a moment. Next project, 272 North California, owner-occupied arts marketing agency and studio, 3D architectural rendering and animation studio. The team behind 272 North California is taking this property here and modifying the building to suit its commercial need. I think this is kind of a cool and interesting use for the space. This is an ETOD pre-development finalist. Let's talk a little bit about some tips to apply. Please feel free to give me a 2-minute warning if we need to move on. But first, values. We'll talk a little bit about this. When you submit your application, and it's whether it's for this program or any of the other 2 programs we've talked about, keep in mind that the people reviewing these are, I've used this term before, but we're not English majors, we're not scientists, we're normal people. These are also some of the projects are going to have members from the community evaluating and scoring different aspects of the applications. So you don't have to worry about making your proposal overly technical or aligned with some kind of buzzword and something particular. Be very clear and direct about what is it that you want to do and what is it that you want to propose. State your mission and how your project aligns with that particular program, whether it's ETOD, CIF, or CDG. Those are the other 2 programs we presented. If you have community support, demonstrate it. And it could be something as simple as letters from the neighboring properties, the neighboring tenants or whomever they are, support from local elected officials or community groups. It's important to know that you have support in the community to satisfy this need or whatever it is that your project proposes. In your application, also demonstrate that you're not alone in trying to realize this project. List who your team is, and if you have a history of success, indicate that as well in your in your application. You want to basically make the impression that, leave an impression that this project has every possibility to actually become a success and come to fruition. That's the impression that you want to leave in the applicant review for the applicant reviewers. Projects are more competitive when overall financing has been secured and permits have been issued. These grants should not be your sole source of funding, but rather the last push that you need to cross that finish line. You should have either through loan or other capital secured more than enough financing to complete your project, whether or not this grant is awarded. I think that's a good approach to have. Include a detailed business plan, and as I said, tell us who your leadership team is, who else is behind this project, who's going to help you realize it. And the track record we talked about, if you belong to a nonprofit or a community group or some kind of advisory board or whomever, and you've had similar successes, tell us what kind of success it is, even if it's not necessarily in development. Number 3, readiness. Chicago Recovery grants, Chicago Recovery Plan grants prioritize projects that are likely to break ground in 2024. Yep, this money has to be awarded by a certain time, and so based on detailed project budgets and timelines, construction design and documents, having site control, that's how we determined whether or not it's feasible to expect that the project will break ground and ultimately be completed within a certain amount of time. Site control is imperative here. If you don't own the land or have a lease that explicitly indicates that you have permission to modify the space, that can be challenging, especially if we're trying to work within this timeline, and working with a self-certified architect. The last thing, and I said I was going to revisit this point, but if your project contains some kind of residential component, or whether it's entirely residential, okay, whether it's mixed use or all residential, a certain percentage of units in that project have to be what HUD describes as income restricted or income limited. I'm going to explain a little bit what that means. So everyone kind of throws around affordable housing as a buzzword, but affordable housing can mean a lot of different things, including market rates. Affordable housing, as defined by HUD, means income restricted or income limited. And so because this particular program is federally funded through ARPA funds, they add this caveat that certain number of units have to be income restricted, income limited. They don't all have to be, but some do. All right. And so you determine the number of units, but whatever that determination is, whatever that percentage is, that's the percentage of the grant that you're eligible for. I'm going to give a quick example. So let's take a 2-flat, just 2 units. One of them will be income restricted, income limited, affordable housing. The other one will just be conventional, your everyday affordable housing, even market rate. So that's a 50% split. So what that means is that because at least one of those units is income restricted, income limited, affordable housing, that means that in this case, it's 50% of the grant is what you're eligible for. It doesn't change anything as far as the reimbursement process, as far as eligible costs, or as far as what you have to submit to support your reimbursement. It just means that every time that you make a submission request, you're working with that corresponding percentage. In this example, we gave 50%. A little cumbersome, but it's a lot more straightforward than you realize. I think that's it for E2D. Yep, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eric. I am Patrick Liao. I'm a member of the Guidehouse team, and we are the project administrator for these DPD Chicago Recovery Plan projects across the board. And so what that means is that my team will be spearheading some of the work to review your application, as well as work closely with those identified finalists to make sure that you are able to get a conditional award letter and therefore move on to the disbursement phase of the project. But well before that, I think my role here today will be to bring you through the application process. Some of these tips you will have already heard in great detail in some of the individual projects, but I will go through them anyway. Application tip number 1 is project readiness. Again, echoing some of the points that have already been made, site control is paramount. Readiness as a whole, and making sure that you're able to meet the 2 years or less kind of timeframe expectation is going to be very, very important. So make sure that you have itemized costs, make sure you have a detailed plan for construction, and make sure that you secure the 25% of the total funding on your end as well. The next tip here is, next slide, please. The next tip here is community engagement. There are specific sections for you in the submittable form to go through project impact, and there will be a space for you to upload documents of community engagement and kind of talk a little bit more about your understanding of local conditions as a whole. So make sure that you speak to businesses around the area. Make sure you speak to your alderperson's office would be a good start as well. But just do demonstrate that you've done that legwork, you've done that engagement, and that kind of what the downstream effects would be of your business or organization setting up in that particular corridor and in that neighborhood. Next slide. And next tip here is for design impact as a whole. So make sure that equity inclusion is at the forefront of your thinking, that you're applying some innovative strategies that perhaps there's no good precedent for in your neighborhood. Make sure that sustainability and especially for some of the infrastructure investments that that these are investments that the city is helping to fund that will stand the test of time as well. Next slide. And once again, the site control part of it, can't stress this too much. Making sure that you have a deed, a lease, or a letter of intent, or a real estate contract that shows that you have a path to site control and the changes that are being made there. Next slide. Itemized costs. Again, this is just general tips for you to kind of make sure that your application is competitive as possible. And I mean, for context, these are extremely competitive grants where we received, I think, over 1,000 applicants in previous rounds to date. So just to make sure that your application stands out as much as possible, please do make sure that your costs are itemized in as much detail as possible. The difference here, so both of them, have roofing as a component of the project. For example, the one on top shows that $9,000 is being spent on roofing, and gives more details about the specific components of the roof that this money will go towards funding. The one at the bottom just says roofing $20,000 without any additional details. So once again, giving as much foresight and clarity and details on what you're going to be spending the funding on is going to be critically important. Next will be the plans and construction documents. So for those that have a design and construction component to their project, please do make sure that you're able to share blueprints, your overall plans, and just a deep dive into what exactly the money will be going to. The application specifically gives you a section to attach a documentation. If you don't have any specific plans and you just say NA, that will likely mean that your application is a little bit less competitive. Next slide is financing. So once again, here, the detail part of it is extremely important. For that 25% of funding that you are expected to provide as the applicant, making sure that you have a clear pathway and that you show the reviewer that you have a clear plan for how to sustain that portion of the overall project will be critically important. And that's it in terms of the specific tips that are worth that we have for you at this juncture. There are lots and lots of questions here, but so please do keep asking your questions, and we will go through them right now. And I'll call upon some of the specific program leads, and as well as Aaron. Would any of the program leads would like to talk a little bit about kind of the overlap between some of the grants? I see there's a lot of questions here about people, wondering if you're able to apply to 2 separate grants within this round.
Yeah, I'll jump in there, Patrick, and looking for others to chime in, catch anything I miss. The intent of we use what we call a universal application for these small grant programs. So it's technically, when you submit to either the climate fund or the community development grants or the ETOD grants, you're using the same portal, and we all have access to those same applications. However, each of us does ask some slightly different questions in our application, as you can imagine, to kind of better understand proposals as they relate to the specific funding priorities our projects have. So I give that note to let folks know that if your project is really better fit, let's say you apply to the climate fund grants, and it turns out it's really a better fit for a community development grant, we can internally send it their way. So I would not recommend filling out multiple applications for the same project. We can always send that to the right folks to review. Although, as noted, we don't always have the same questions within that application. So I would strongly recommend thinking through which program feels like the right fit to you and starting there. That way you'll have given that group the most information you can. I also just want to note that within a given funding round, we cannot provide multiple grants across multiple programs to the same organization, to the same project. So I know there were some questions in the chat. Well, what if we split our project up? What if we have some elements that are really climate focused, and maybe some elements that are purely community development or purely ETOD? You're welcome to apply that way, but we wouldn't be able to award both of those grants. We would only be able to award one grant. We can't stack across these projects in any given round. But I'll let Laura, Aaron, Eric, others chime in with anything I may have missed.
I don't really have anything to add. I think you covered it, Luke. Thanks.
Yeah, same here. I would say, this is Eric. I would say that some of that overlap that Patrick mentioned is what I refer to as the similarities as far as like the what we look for in the applications or what makes up an application, but each program also has obviously very unique purpose and mission.
Laura,
Great.
it looks like you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Patrick.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Laura, it looks like you answered this question in the Q&A, but we got it again. Do you mind addressing a little bit more about the structure of the grant and the grantee portions?
Sure. So essentially this project funds, okay, so it's a reimbursable grant. You have to be able to cover the full total project costs. This is a grant that will reimburse up to 75% of your total project costs, or $250,000, whichever is less. So you are ultimately responsible then for 25% of your total project costs, or anything above that amount. So anything above 250,000, you're covering. The way that's done is you will, if you're selected as a finalist, the disbursement is done by in four different chunks. You can take up to those 4 different chunks. So you can take your money in one lump sum at the very end, or you can do it in 4 chunks. Those are called disbursements. And you have to meet specific milestones for each of those disbursements. So for instance, the first milestone, you can receive up to 25% of your award amount. So let's say you get the full 250 awarded to you, you can take up to $62,500, that's 25%, in your first disbursement. And to meet that, you have to have gotten your permit issued. That's the first milestone. Then there's 3 other milestones, just quickly. Those are rough inspections passed, final inspections passed, and then your certificate of occupancy, meaning your doors are opened. Those are the 4 milestones: permit issued, rough inspections, final inspections, doors open. At each of those, you can request up to 25% of your grant. So for instance, for those of you asking about financing and you're worried that you don't have all of your financing secured, we understand that. We know that you may not have the total project costs. You may need a little bit of the project of the grant funding in order to keep your project going, right? So you need that first disbursement to cover some of the construction after that. We understand that, and that's why we do it in that way. So we know that you may not be able to show that you have all your finances secured. Show what you have secured. Show us that you at least have 25% secured, maybe, or close to that. And then show us what's pending. Show us that, you know, you have a potential loan, you're looking into a loan, or you're looking into borrowing money or something like that. Show us that. As much as you can show that, it's important. So I hope that answered. If there's any other specifics, feel free to unmute yourself or pop it in the questions.
All right, it looks like another question that we've gotten a couple of times is about timing for the funding rounds. So I just want to be clear with everyone that whether we have another CRP grant round or not is going to be funding dependent. So we don't currently have another application deadline. Our final deadline this year is August 18th. And if we announce another deadline, that will be funding dependent. So if you're applying for a Chicago Recovery Plan grant, you should aim to get your application in by this deadline on August 18th. It looks like another question that we're getting a lot of is if we will reimburse for work that may have already taken place during the application process or before we announce our finalists. Does one of the program managers want to address that?
I can answer that for the ETOD program. The answer is yes, up to 6 months prior to the public announcement date, whenever that is, later this fall or winter. So long as those costs are eligible costs, that doesn't change whether it's work that has been completed or work that is yet to be completed. And as long as that reimbursement request, eventual reimbursement request, is supported with the necessary documentation. For the ETOD program, for this ETOD development program, we are adding a flexibility, if you will, and including not just development costs, which are typically construction costs, but also allowing pre-development costs, which are typically things that happen before construction. So again, accounting, attorney, land acquisition, project manager, up to 6 months.
And for CDG, same thing. We will only fund the expenses you incur 6 months prior to the announcement date. So for this August 18th application deadline, the announcement date when the finalists will be announced is going to be late in 2023. So we're looking at somewhere maybe late November. We're not exactly sure when that will be yet. When that occurs, you can, and you're a finalist, you can submit expenses for 6 months prior to that date. So we're looking at roughly, what is that? June, July, August, September, October, November, December. May, I think. June, July, August, roughly May or later would be eligible for that. But anything before that would not be.
And it seems like this is one of the few instances where the climate fund is actually a little bit maybe stricter than the other two programs. We are able to fund projects that have broken ground before they've applied, but we can only fund elements that have been purchased or paid for from the moment of award onward. So we don't have that same looking backward 6 months element that the other two programs do.
All right, sorry, I'm looking through a number of questions that we still have open here. Okay. I've seen at least a couple of people ask about community support. There is a place on the application to upload letters of community support. It's in section 9 of the community development grant and the ETOD grant. It may. Luke, can you speak to if there's a place to upload letters of support on the climate grants?
It's a good question. I was just about to go look through that. I believe we have a location for that, or at least a catch-all for any additional materials, and that's where that could be located. I know I saw in the chat, should we email things to DPD? Definitely would say no to that. If there's anything you want reviewed as part of the application, I would find a place to put that in the application. If you don't see a question that allows for that, I would find as general of a question that you can, where there's an upload component, and I would upload those elements there. That's really the only way that we will see them and see them tied to your application.
Okay, great. I'm seeing a lot of questions that are specific, that are very specific to the application. In our final application section, I hope we addressed a number of those. You'll see, and I know we've said this before, if you go through the application and you look at what is optional versus what is required, it does provide you with what we are looking for in those specific sections. In terms of, there's a place to upload design documents, construction documents, to provide information on if you're working with an architect, and the other financials that we ask for. So the number one thing we can tell you to do if you're looking for what documents need to be provided is just open a draft of the application. The application does not need to be submitted when you open it. You can review it and save it and come back to it.
There's a question about being previously awarded a TIF TIF money, I can take a stab at it and open to some input from my colleagues as well. But there's a question: can you receive this grant? I'm assuming any of these three these are CRP grants, Chicago Recovery Plan grants. If you were also awarded, I'm assuming previously, TIF. And so the answer to that is possibly. Depends on the scope of work that that person reported when they received TIF support, and the scope of work that they're intending to do in their application to these CRP programs. Scope of work or what you intend to use the money has to be very different, because this is all City of Chicago money. That doesn't mean that the same applies with any other external funding sources. So for example, if you received money from the Illinois Department of Housing, or some other kind of private subsidy, you can use any non-City of Chicago money toward the same expense. But if it's City of Chicago money, has to be the scope work has to be very different. This is what we refer to as stacking, using multiple City of Chicago funding sources to solve the same expense, the same issue, and that you cannot do. But if in this case, if you were previously awarded TIF money to do something very different, at least with the TOD that actually has come up, those scopes have to be very distinct.
I was asked to address the profit and loss questions that keep popping up. So generally what we're looking for is whatever you can show. So if you have a detailed business plan that you've done, that would be great. Not everybody has that. We understand that. So give us what you have, even if it's just, I've crunched my numbers and this is what I've come up with, and whatever you can show. And what we also want to see is, if you're an existing business, how have you been able to sustain yourself? How are you making money? What is your business that you've been able to keep going? And, that we're taking a risk, right? So the reason that you guys are putting in money, we're putting in money. So there's a risk on both sides. So what we want to see is, how sustainable is this going to be? So anything that you can show like that. We understand that not everybody has really formal kinds of documentation or specific kinds of things. So do your best, fill out as much detail as you can. And I guess that's all I'm going to say on that. Anybody want to add anything to that?
I don't have anything to add to that, Laura, but I see some questions around other due diligence elements as they're related to applications. We cannot provide grants to organizations or entities that currently hold city debt. So if there is outstanding debt that your business or your organization owes to the city, that would prevent us from making the grant award. However, what I'll note is we can still select those kinds of entities as finalists, as long as that debt is under $5,000 at this point. Debts exceeding that, those organizations are ineligible to be named as finalists. But if the debt is below $5,000, a group could be named as a finalist, but would need to clear that debt up prior to actually signing a grant contract and receiving an award. Just want to make that clear that and if there are other violations related to building codes or outstanding permits, we do a due diligence review towards the end of our review process to see what kind of red flags come up during that. So if you're aware of any of those items, and things are either have been addressed or you're currently working to address them, you're working to get on a payment plan, any of that, I would definitely include any information you have on that in your application so that we can be aware of it. We know that things are moving, and we can start asking questions here with our colleagues in other departments like the Department of Finance and the Department of Buildings to see what the status of those things are. But just want to make that clear to folks.
Erin, I'm seeing another question here too about resources to help with filling out an application. Would you be able to speak on that more generally?
The Community Development Grant Resources page has options for folks to reach out to. We do recommend going to the Chicago Business Centers or to the Neighborhood Development Centers for help filling out applications. You can check our website. There are some additional resources in addition to that, but if you go to the Neighborhood Business Development Centers through VACP, you can likely find delegate agencies in your area that have programming for that.
I've got one here. There's a question. If you apply this time and don't get accepted, can you apply again if the program is offered again? Do you have a disadvantage if you applied before? The answer is yes, you can apply again. If you aren't selected for a previous funding round, you can reapply. I wouldn't think that's a disadvantage. I think that it would be an advantage to you because you're familiar with the application platform, the kinds of questions and the things that we're going to ask you to submit. What it doesn't mean, however, is that you have an advantage in being selected. Every funding round is independent of the previous as far as evaluations go, and as far as application opportunities. If applications are being accepted, for all we know, that could be the last time that we're accepting applications for that particular program. There's no guarantee that there will be additional funding rounds or additional opportunities to apply, if you will. That is contingent on funding. It sounds cliche, but it's very true. So if you think you can draft a proposal and submit the required documentation, please do so. Feel encouraged to do so. That's the whole point of this, is that we want projects to come our way so that we can evaluate them and support them as well.
And just to piggyback on that, Eric, I saw some questions around, we received prior funding from a program, or maybe TIF funding, or any other kind of city funding in the past. That does not really impact your application at this stage. Even if you were a grantee of a different Chicago Recovery Plan grant program in the past, we have kind of a hard line when it comes to stacking funding within a given round, but you are not automatically ineligible if you received funding in the past. Having said that, our goal across all of these projects is to make sure we're looking for an equitable distribution of grant dollars. And so, if you have received funding in the past, you're not ineligible, but we definitely are looking to make sure that these dollars get spread around as well. So I still would encourage you to apply. We want to fund great projects, even if they're coming from folks who may have received funding in the past. But we also look to make sure that we're spreading money around to new folks as well.
Aaron, I'm not sure if we got this question you answered, but what resources are available to assist with applications? I think you posted a resource.
Hey, Eric, Patrick just asked me that one, and I just dropped the link to the Neighborhood Business Development Centers from the BACP in the chat to everybody. So if you're looking for resources to help fill out the application, you can go to the Community Development Resources page on the DPD webpage, or you can check out the link that I just dropped in the chat that has delegate agencies from the neighborhood business development centers.
I'm gonna answer, I don't know if Vicky Watts's question about the providing housing supportive services. Would a nonprofit that provides housing / supportive services, staffing that included staffing including live-in staff within that residential space be eligible for funding, i.e. group homes for adults with disabilities? So for CDG, if it were a project that was a nonprofit where it's a mixed use area, so you're doing a project that is renovating or expanding services or something like that for this nonprofit that has both residential as well as commercial, the residential portion of the project has to be less than 50%. So 49% residential, 51% or more commercial. Then yes, potentially. We do not fund support services. We don't fund the services piece. The project has to be like a construction project. So it's renovating, it's expanding the location, it's adding on a roof, it's fixing the facility in some manner or whatever like that. We aren't funding like an expert to come in and speak with your residential staff about training for blah, 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 or whatever like that. We don't fund services. So I just wanted to make sure, because that question was a little bit talking about the services piece. I just want to clarify on that. I'll try to write that up, but that was a lot. So I wanted to answer that and not just have to write it. So.
And just to add, I think I put this in a response as well in the text function, but for the Climate Infrastructure Fund, the only residential related uses that we can provide funding to would be group living facilities. And so I think in one of the responses to the questions, I dropped a link to our zoning code where the group living category is discussed. You can see if you meet those qualifications. From what I hear in that question as it was posed in the chat, that sounds like it could be a group living facility. But again, those are not simply affordable housing projects, not simply projects that may be owned by a nonprofit, or not simply developments that may be owned by a nonprofit, but actually provide those services on site, kind of putting them in a different kind of residential category. Those are properties that we can provide funding to. We can also provide funding to mixed use projects that include a residential component, but we can only fund improvements made to the commercial or nonprofit, as it were, components of the building. So that one gets a little sticky. You can imagine if you have rooftop solar in a mixed use building, that energy is going to the entire building. That's something that we generally cannot fund because we are focused on non-residential uses. But if you're making energy improvements to tenant space, commercial tenant spaces on the first floor of a mixed use building, perhaps that's something that we could support. And then finally, I know there was a question on this as well in the chat, the home-based businesses. I can't speak to the other programs, but at least for the Climate Fund, we do review those on a case-by-case basis. But similar to the mixed use idea, it would really need to be improvements that are aimed at impacts to the home-based business or home-based organization, and not really improvements or investments that are there to benefit the residential portion of that building. So just wanted to flag those.
For the question about the BIPOC, Black-owned businesses and stuff like that. I apologize. I don't have those numbers right in front of me. We are taking that data down, and that's something that we're looking at. So I don't know. Somebody's asking like, what are the specific numbers? And I'm so sorry. I don't know that information right off the top of my head.
I can answer a question here. There's should a profit and loss statement be included if the business is new? You can submit an application if your business is new without a P&L statement, but as long as you understand that if this particular funding round, other applications do have one, as well as everything else that particular application submitted, those other applications may be stronger applicants. But yes, you can submit an application without that particular document. You have an opportunity also to either submit it once you have it or update it as you move, as if you're selected through the contracting phase, which is what follows being selected as a finalist. Does anyone else disagree or have anything to add?
Sorry, y'all. I think all of your panelists are just scrolling through all of the questions and trying to make sure that we answered as many as we possibly could. It is 3 p.m., so we do have to wind this down. Program managers, do you have any final notes before we sign off?
This is Eric. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Please feel encouraged to submit your applications and proposals. My colleagues will probably echo this, but all of us here, we are passionate about supporting and any way we can. We want to do everything we can to help your projects become reality. Please send us your questions, take advantage of the resources, and really do hope that you see some projects and you feel inspired to apply.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming. We really look forward to looking at your applications. I know there are a few questions that we didn't get to. Please email us at dpd@cityofchicago.org. I just dropped that address in the chat. It's also available on our website. If you send us those questions, they get to our team and they get to the appropriate program manager. We hope that you'll all submit by 11:59 p.m. on August 18th. Thank you so much for taking the time.